Good afternoon, everyone. So, what we're discussing today is how ESG data has to be prioritized by CFOs so that they give a right representation to lenders, investors, and regulators. So, one thing that we have noticed in our conversations with the CFO community is ESG is not a peripheral conversation now. It has captured a lot of headspace of the management and board. And in fact, there are two interesting, or rather, one very interesting update that had happened a couple of days back, where world's largest pension fund, which is Government Pension Investment Fund of Japan, with $1.8 trillion under management, completely pivoted towards impact investment. So that will lead to a lot of investments coming into the ESG space. And in fact, in India, with the SEBI enhanced disclosures, not only for self but for value chain, it will definitely lead to a better disclosure environment in India and better value creation for India. But there are two main challenges that every CFO in our conversation has presented to us. One, how do they present ESG data with the same integrity as financial reporting? Financial reporting, of course, over a period of time has gone through a lot of revisions. You have US GAAP, Indian GAAP, IFRS, and all. But integrity of that ESG disclosure is still work in progress. Second, how does a CFO convert or rather communicate the value of sustainability, not only in terms of compliance, just as a compliance, but how does it create value for the organization and competitive advantage? So these are the two broad questions. And of course, since CFO is also the custodian of that particular data, they need to ensure that the data is presented to, first of all, regulators, because of course there's a regulatory requirement for that particular disclosure, but now more so to the financiers and of course investors who are very closely looking at not only the balance sheet but also the carbon footprint of the organizations. So to unpack that, I have Vineet from Tata Capital. He is partner and head of Tata Capital Innovations Fund, and I have Shaayak, who is the co-founder of BDSG, with me to unpack these questions. So Shaayak, my first question to you is, how do you translate a vision for ESG into actionable insights? Because this is where something starts, right? And you would remember, I mean, in fact, I'll bring a recent conversation that you and I had with the CXO, where there was a high level ESG aspiration for a very large conglomerate, but they didn't have any data. They were rather reaching out to you and me to understand in terms of what to do. So, how do you convert that aspiration into actionable insights or measurable insights?
Thanks Tushar for that question, and thanks to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I think the first uh, step, and this is a very well-defined system. While the ESG term has been around and been coined since the 90s, you guys might remember the triple bottom line concept. That was still high level. When we're talking about converting it to real numbers, the change happened in 2015 with the Paris Climate Agreement, and what that brought on is the concept of materiality. Right. The first thing is ESG is not the same for different industries. An insurance company and the same conglomerate we were referring to, right, may have completely different profiles. And this ties back to the system and concept of materiality. What are those material topics? For example, emissions, water consumption, might even be employee health and safety, like you mentioned, non-financial reporting, right? There are so many metrics that come into place. The first is, based on my industry, what are the relevant material topics that I even affect? How do I impact the environment, and how does the environment impact me? And then once you are able to shortlist those topics, then even when you're converting it to raw data, Tushar, it's a journey. So you actually prioritize a further subset of those topics. So once you've outlined your materiality, your next 5 years are clearly set, meaning that for those starting the journey, sometimes adopting ESG is actually at this stage a lot easier than those who are mature and are looking to go to the next level.
Right. And Vineet, you bring the investor's perspective. So when you are investing or you're evaluating an opportunity, what are the ESG parameters you look at, or rather you insist in terms of disclosures when you are evaluating any opportunity?
So I would actually bucket it into Tushar two parts. Some of them are actually more go no go decisions. Right? So for example, if there is an incidence of fraud, right? which we are able to see. For example, if there is clearly on the environment side, the area is prone to a lot of floods. So these are aspects which are actually more go, and then we are off it. There, there are, however, some areas where they are manageable. So this point, there is data which is available, which shows that the carbon footprint is high, but still it is manageable. Then we put in place a plan of action. At times we incorporate that in our documentation itself, which is to say some of it can be, as you know, condition subsequent, some of it is, as an investor, we have some rights at the board level, which we ensure that it on a continuous basis it is followed up and ensure that it is complied with. So I would say it is bucketed into two parts. Some of them not only material, if they are to an extent which is that large, we just don't do the deal, we walk out of the deal. There are others which are obviously manageable when there's a plan of action and over a period of time we can make sure they are complied with.
So you mentioned about a plan of action.
Yeah,
The starting point of plan of action is measuring where you are,
yeah,
right? Uh, I think the biggest challenge for Indian companies right now is uh, in terms of measurement of where they are,
yeah,
right? So it's a combination.
yeah,
One, are they capturing all the relevant data points
yeah,
to measure where they are?
yeah,
And second is, what is the integrity of the data that they are capturing?
yeah,
Because we have come across many instances
yeah,
where the data that is being reported in BRSR,
yeah,
there's a huge deviation in terms of what is being reported and what is the ground reality.
correct.
So, question, of course, to Shaayak, you, and then we'll come to you because you are evaluating that data and Shaayak is helping in reporting that data. I think data management, data measurement is a big problem, right? Especially when you divide ESG into environmental, social, and governance. Governance factors, you can still capture a bit of it in terms of, as you mentioned, there are instances of fraud or there could be a auditors comment, etc. But when it comes to environment and social, Shaik, how do you how do you convert that again coming to that high level aspiration in terms of I need to know what is my environmental impact, I need to know what is my social impact. How do you convert that aspiration into specific measurable results?
Uh, Again, I think Tushar, you made a very valid point in the beginning itself by saying environmental and social are different from governance. I often tell my customers the same thing that while it's ESG, they're not all equal, and you're very right. In some cases, environmental, and in some cases, social. This become the primary determining factor for any company, and the accuracy of measurement is critical to the data integrity. There's a famous saying in tech: "Garbage in is equal to garbage out," right? Which is the problem that Indian corporates have been facing for the past couple of years. I think there's three methods in which this really gets solved. I think the first problem that we had, which is still the most difficult challenge, is the disconnect at the ground level uh, with the management is because these priorities do not trickle down to the shop floor. When we're talking about the true impact that our companies have, Vineet, you and I have also had this discussion, right? Is essentially the scope 1 and scope 2 of the people in the value chain who are starting the production. And there, unless this is a priority at the shop floor level, this is where we are getting the first inflow of garbage. And that brings me to my second point of how to solve this. This is where technology comes in because a lot of this uh, was only being connected from a checkbox compliance standpoint. Even India, we have pollution control guidelines, we have occupational health and safety guidelines. But you're talking about stuff that happens on registers, emails. If you're in Excel, that's honestly an advanced state. That's a good place to start. So here is where technology plays a huge role because you have to remove the human in the middle wherever possible to improve this data accuracy and ties back to what we discussed earlier. No one is asking the corporates to get it 100% right in year one. This is a constant process like our accounting is, and it's important to make sure that what is a high priority for our industry and our organization from a business lens as well as an environmental and stakeholder or social lens is what we take care of in the initial phases of our strategy. So the first point being, of course, taking these processes and prioritizing it at the shop floor. The second being digitizing it wherever possible. And I think the third and most important point, and perhaps we'll discuss this in a little bit, is also the importance of value chain. Because here, if I take an example of let's say a top listed company, and this is why SEBI has put out the disclosures in this fashion. A top listed company and perhaps their category A or tier 1 suppliers who may also be listed, if it really becomes a pain point, a regulatory pain point for them, they will solve the problem. But their suppliers or the suppliers to the suppliers, what we call tier 2, right? Unless we are bringing them along with us at the top management level of the large listed companies, this is not going to be a challenge that is solved easily, because there is an entire awareness gap that is missing at that privately owned MSME level, which has to be solved with certain downstream players taking a bit of the load. It's not going to be something that can only be solved through a regulatory or policy lens. It has to be solved by the industry. So these are the three ways in which we can improve the overall data quality of the industry.
And Vineet, when you spoke about action plan, how do you measure the progress?
So again, on the environment piece, to his point, it is not as easy to measure. It will be kind of. On the governance piece, this is actionable, it is doable, and we do this. It is obviously possible to put systems in place, and if there are, let's say, regulatory gray areas, over a period of time, we ensure either uh, having appoint a compliance officer separately or get an audit undertaken regularly, that the entity complies and moves out of that area or reduces that area. So that is possible. On the social side also it is doable, which is though not as quantitative, but we are able to see that, okay, let's say if there is not gender diversity is not there adequately, that is done. So those are done. Environment is not as easy. In fact, Shayas and I also had this debate that, but the point that I think he makes, which I agree with, is that now we're starting. From where we were to where we are now, it's a good starting point. And I was yesterday speaking to a construction company, and they also do the same Pareto principle, right? Do an 80-20. So what they are also doing on the data side is able to identify 80% of the areas where they have 90% confidence of the accuracy. So he is sourcing material, let's say from a steel company, cement from another company. They in turn ensure that whatever are the emission intensity is certified by it. So I think it's a work in progress. Lot to be done. The BRSRs are not, satisfactory.
They are evolving. They are evolving.
They are evolving, but I think our discussion from where we started to today, good progress. Hopefully, things will. There is though a lot of awareness. Right? Not everyone knows that this needs to be done. I think some bit of action from the government will also maybe help us to proceed in the right direction.
You are right that there is awareness, and of course the entire space and the ecosystem is also evolving. Uh, but I want to put across a question to both of you. Uh, how do you measure the benefit of implementing a ESG program? Right, because the CFO or the board is going to ask you. I'm. It's ultimately. I'm taking your cue from your point. Uh, somehow it is for few organizations it's still a checkbox exercise, right? It should not be, because ESG investment will have a huge positive impact on the in future. But if you have to communicate the benefit as of today, why should an organization invest in ESG today? And have you been able to measure a positive impact on any of the organizations where you implemented the programs, which has actually resulted in a huge benefit to the organization?
Uh, First of all, I think this is a very enriching conversation, gentlemen, and you guys have brought up some very deep points in the ESG debate, and I would like to address that. But coming first directly to your question, Tushar, in terms of the tangible benefits for a CFO, very specifically, from implementing any ESG program or priority, I think we have to start from first principles thinking. And the impact is somewhat diluted in Indian markets because of the low labor costs that we serve over here. Otherwise, the first primary benefit of implementing an ESG program is actually the cross-cutting efficiencies that come. ESG cuts across your whole organization, whether it's a operations or HR, your finance. It's a complete non-financial lens, a quantitative non-financial lens into your entire organizational operations across geographies. So while we have low labor costs here, so we our initial go-to is, hey, let's throw people at the problem. Fundamentally, in the long term, taking an ESG based approach gives us a lot more decision making capability. That is the first tangible benefit that a CFO would achieve, because they are getting almost a second variable to compare their spends against, to uh, ensure the efficacy of any initiative. The second huge tangible benefit, Tushar, you just briefly touched upon it, is and I would say again, you got to wake up and smell the coffee, right? If we are discussing about actual uh, initiatives and actual funding being rolled out today, one is what's coming in the next 3 years, and again, like we've been discussing, where we are now compared to where we were 3 years ago, should give you an idea of the way in which these multilateral financial instruments are turning, not only in the form of direct credit, but sovereign funds, like we discussed, private equity, LP community, right? So both private, public, and debt markets are adopting to incentivize corporate sustainability, primarily because at some point there's two aspects here. One is the fear, again from a CFO's lens, the fear of an imposition of taxation, right, upon your impact, environmental impact. The second, which is, I would say, discussed less in public circles, was discussed highly in chief sustainability officer and executive circles, is the rising cost of climate on your business. Like you discussed of the physical risk, flood risk, earthquake risk, drought risk, right? What is the cost of your adaptation and reporting measures subtracted from the cost of the impact that you're going to face? Meaning that, hey, if I incur a certain capex and then I amortize it over the next 10 years, in 10 years, when my temperature is 2.5 degrees higher, the loss on my overall business, let's take agri, very easy to understand as an industry how this would impact. Right? I've actually offset that loss completely. I have either I have routed, I have done a circular, let's say an integration into my business where I'm using my waste materials in order to, that could be one ESG process where I'm actually able to monetize my waste materials. Another would be to decarbonize my energy inputs to avoid a carbon tax, like I mentioned. Another would be to kind of limit my exposure or limit my impact on the communities that are surrounding me, and how this would benefit. So there are many approaches here. And Vineet and Tushar, this ties back to the primary point that you guys both agreed on, where, hey, it may not be perfect, but it's a good place to start. The entire concept of sustainability and corporate sustainability is built on systems thinking and pathways. These pathways come with trade-offs inbuilt. So the trade-off here is that upfront cost that a company is bearing, which directly becomes the responsibility of a CFO. But it is to move on to a better pathway to future proof you, and then having an easier off ramp into the next activity. So as the pace of innovation and the pace of adoption meets the pace of regulation, which is currently leading now, you will be in a place to move on to the correct pathway a lot quicker than starting at that time. Like we mentioned, it's easy to start now because the expectations are attuned for where the companies are at, especially in India. This was not necessarily the case even if you look at the European markets.
Great. But when some, I mean, when a board is looking at ESG investment, one thing that they're also looking at, of course, they're looking at future, but they're looking at immediate benefit as well, right? Uh, the stage at which, let's say, Indian companies are in terms of disclosures, right? And you see that market very closely. Uh, does it actually leads to lowering down your cost of capital, where investors or even lenders are looking at ESG disclosures and giving some kind of an incentivization or rebate where companies can actually enjoy a lower cost of capital?
I don't think it is happening on a one-on-one direct basis. Right? To a very large extent, if you were to look at an organization, and again going back to the original thesis, it is more attuned to the DNA of an organization. Right? If the DNA of the organization is such that it is compliant with all say by complying in only two, three areas, will it result in some tangible benefit and a lower cost of capital? No. So it's an overarching concept which will result in a lower cost of capital. Maybe to pick, Shreyas's point, see what also happens by implementing it is also a more long-term versus a short-term mentality, right? Uh, by way of an example, let's say a social issue like unemployment of fishermen, if a business is in that area, may not impact now, but over a period of time, that very issue can become potential existential issue. So similarly, if there is noise around the factory, right, on the environment side, and may not be an issue immediate, but if there are murmurs around something coming up, it is better resolved at some nominal cost. Frankly, these initiatives don't cost as much. It is more a thought and an attitude I feel to resolve this, which will result in long-term benefits.
Got it. And of course, growth and development in any industry will come where there are a lot of investments that are flowing in. One is on the side of whether the companies are serious about ESG, but then companies also need solutions around ESG. You found a problem, how do you solve it, right? So we need, as an investor, what's the trend that you're seeing in terms of what kind of technology is being brought in the market, what kind of innovative ideas are coming into this particular market to solve the current ESG problems, and of course there are some evolving problems that are being cited right now, which will come up, and eventually the companies will come. Like for example, everyone has a UPI because there were enough companies which came in and actually brought it to the mass market. ESG is still in that area where companies, very few companies are adopting latest technologies which are available. So, what is the trend which is coming up in this in the sustainability ecosystem, which will help companies in adopting one globally benchmark practices, and of course, it will translate into better unlocking of capital or lowering down the cost of capital.
So heartening to see that there are a number of startups in the space. Thank you. And this is across the board. And investors like us keep on looking for such startups. He's a live example. So I reached out to him because data on ESG is scarce. So therefore, anyone who is building a solution around that is extremely useful. So you see not only what he is doing, but number of companies using AI to be able to improve energy efficiency, including let us say this hall. And these are, and you need to do that because one system has to talk to the other. It cannot work on a standalone basis. And significant, I can say 30 to 40% improvement in energy efficiency just by using AI and data, AI and energy efficiency. Right? Similarly, companies working on new materials to do battery technologies, companies working, let's say, on materials to develop bioplastics, recycling, so on and so forth, all deep tech companies, by the way. Right? So it is an interesting development that we see. The other very nice piece to see is that India as a country, we have always been very price and cost conscious. Right? So most of the tech that will be developed on this side does not have a green premium. It will compete as is both on quality and price with a conventional product, maybe even at a discount. So as they say, more for less for more is a theme that you see panning out. What is lacking, if you may ask, is some bit of funding, frankly, right? And there are pockets within that where you see lack of funding. And I compare it with traditional sectors which are frankly flush with fintech by way of an example. So on this side there is less of funding. Hopefully, over a period of time that also gets resolved.
So, one final question to both of you. One thing that comes up regularly is while SEBI has enforced disclosures, whether it is on the organization or enhanced disclosures to the value chain partners, there's still a lot of greenwashing that happens, right? And it is a big problem. You may adopt technology, you may not adopt technology, you're still reporting whatever you're reporting, right? How does these deep tech companies or latest investments that are going to come in, and Shaayak, currently in your role as a co-founder of Breathe ESG, which is a full stack ESG company, how do you address or how do you help company or rather help the board in overcoming these greenwashing problems?
Thanks, Tushar. This is probably the most important question. Uh, First, I would like to first give some heartening news, because it's very easy for us to assume that because of corporate greed, greenwashing is the easy way out. But truthfully, and I'm just speaking about the Indian industry at this point, this is something that is being avoided at the major level. Let's say Nifty 50, for example, just taking an example. This is something that is being avoided because people understand that there is there are no skeletons in the closet when we're talking about ESG reporting. I think again the cost of ESG is a concern that is extremely overblown. Vineet, like you discussed earlier, just having visibility on these issues, right, well in advance is a huge benefit to companies. It's not the other way around. It's not something that will hurt them. I think the top and largest companies are very cognizant of the cost of greenwashing. The cost of greenwashing is not worth the benefit. The minuscule brand benefit that you get or the slight competitive advantage that you get is not something that companies that are truly seeking value are even chasing after. In fact, much the opposite. They are looking to turn ESG from a cost center to a value driver. How can we make sustainable business practices into profit centers for our company? This is the true conversation that is happening at a certain level. At the same time, putting the good news aside, right, coming to the fundamental, let's say, moral hazard or information asymmetry that exists amongst companies where, if it's possible, they could do it, the role that deep tech technology solutions like ours play, and also the role of sustainability teams, which is a new set of professional work that tools and technologies like us actually empower. Again, we are not just being used by the company, we are being used and purchased by these sustainability teams that are being created and very aspirational for people in my generation to work. Uh, Here, the importance of transparency and the points we discussed earlier, trying to remove the human in the middle, allows these teams to focus on their work, because their job, truly it is their job within the organization to imbibe sustainability into the DNA. And we have to make it, for a lack of better word, idiot proof, meaning that the service providers and the solution providers are ensuring that these sustainability teams are empowered to do skilled work by automating all of the low level work as well as the technological innovation at the ground level, so that whatever strategic decision is being taken is taken on a very, I would say, rock hard data spine. Uh, this is the only way, because, like I said, the disconnect is between the top and the bottom level. At the top level, no one is actively seeking to greenwash, or I won't say no one, but folks are looking to do this seriously. It's taking a lot of headspace. And at the bottom level, if we prevent the tools from being able to fudge or obfuscate the data, if we ensure that the data quality is given directly to the sustainability teams who are searching for this is how we will solve the greenwashing conundrum, and take it forward into the long run. Because the cost of greenwashing is not worth it for anyone, and we've seen this play out not to a large scale in the Indian market, but already globally. And there have been small examples. I think the first time you see a major explosion play out, you'll see a lot of adoption in Egypt.
And so there is the same solution which was, I guess, in the fintech side, which is data. That is the only solution in this side also, right? And I guess if you take a step back, see, a finance professional is very used to hardcore numbers and very fine numbers. As against that, when he sees the ESG data, to the same professional, this is very fuzzy. And he says, this doesn't sound right, and therefore there is less importance. So we need to go to that rigor. And I, and what previously, if you and I have been here, the data on the financial side was also now with a, now with GST, this is rock solid data, right? I think we will have to build a similar stack. He is best placed to advise how to do it, but my understanding is that it is doable. The reason it is doable because scope 3 for an entity is scope 1 and 2 for the other entity. So if you try and stack this up, this is doable, and if we can manage that, uh, hopefully the cost of data will reduce to be able to do all of this. But I think this is going back to our original point. This is work in progress. Some significant progress made, lot yet to be done, right?
So I feel, I mean, if ESG is part of the operational and the financial DNA of a company, it will definitely be a competitive advantage for the organization in the long run. Of course, there are some steps to go. In fact, the regulation is also evolving. Regulators themselves are learning a lot. But I definitely feel with the talent pool that India has, the kind of deep tech companies that have come up into the entire ecosystem space, if companies adopt right practices with the right tools, they will be able to access capital at a lower cost. They will be able to drive efficiencies, as you have mentioned. I think few of your customers are already benefiting from driving efficiencies by implementing what BDSG is doing for them, and that will lead to a long-term competitive advantage for us. Yeah. So that's what I feel, and I think I would want to thank both of you for taking out time and sharing your experience.
It was a
In case
pleasure,
if
Tushar.
you have
Thank
any
you.
final words,
Lovely.
we'll be happy to